specialized way. Today, we're going to be focusing a little bit on how they propose to sort of uplift the poor of the world. So I'm going to just stop the share for the moment and let's have speaker view. Okay. And what we are going to be talking about, of course, is what you've got there on the slide as I showed you. Now, China has a different way of looking at its population. As Professor Mahbubani has said, they have a policy, a strategy of uplifting the poor, not necessarily following an ideology. What we do, of course, here in the West, rest of the world practically, is we try to follow an ideology like capitalism and market sort of economy. But these have, up to a point, delivered, but not in the way that China has managed to do it in a very short period of time. Because what China has done in a short period of time is to uplift 800 million people in 40 years. Now, just to get an idea as to how many 800 million people are, that's the whole population of North and South America. To have uplifted them out of poverty, I think it's something quite astonishing. We naturally don't get to hear about the positive things that China has done, simply because we have a press and a motivation, a type of propaganda type of machine, which tries to sort of not say anything positive about China and try to say all the good things about what the West has accomplished. Now, what we know, of course, is right now, the West is, as Professor Mahbubani says, is in decline. Since the last 70 years, what we have delivered, of course, is some certain level of betterment to the world. But if you look at the division that still exists, we can see that the rich have become richer and the poor remain the same. In fact, so much so, in the last 50 years, the middle class in USA has not done any better. They have remained more or less the same, which is one of the reasons why Trump has so many followers. Because the people in the middle class, they have not really done well. So what we have is a type of model that we have been following, which is about the capitalist system with trickle-down sort of economics. And that is mostly controlled through the big powers that be, big sort of money classes that are there. We have the moneyed class, the rich people, not just in USA, but the world over, who call the shots. They are called globalists. Now, these type of people dictate to governments what sort of strategies they should be adopted. And that's why what we have a strategy for the last 70 years, there's a war going on by USA, some part of the world or the other. And right now we have Ukraine. And we don't hear much about Ukraine because the papers don't print too much about it. There are huge losses. 350,000 people have died. 10 million people have left the country or even more. And what was expected that Russia might go down and collapse and so on, that has not happened. In fact, it has become stronger. So when you have these type of policies that have been pursued, generally by the collective West, it has not delivered to the expected levels. And that's where China comes in. And China says, no, our policy is to uplift the poor. They started off with a communist system, but then they realized that that had limitations. And therefore, in the 1970s, Deng Xiaoping came in after Mao, and he then started to open up the economy. So we have a mixed economy there. Doesn't mean that China still doesn't have control of its economy. They do have control over the large sort of essential areas, but they have brought in the private sort of sector in, and very successfully. And they have not left it to market forces itself to try and deliver the prosperity. They have been able to undertake programs that have been targeted to sort of lift the poor, and they have been successful. I've talked about this in my earlier talks. If you go to the archive of mine, which I think it's on the timetable somewhere, it goes into some sort of detail as to how they have done it. But today what we're going to talk about is a bit more on how they plan to deliver a similar type of successful upliftment of the poor in the rest of the world. When I say rest of the world, we're talking about the South mostly and the poorer countries of the world. We're not talking about Europe so much, but South America, Africa, Asia, these are sort of places where there has been a lot of, if you like, lack of development, corruption, and so on and so forth. So why has that come about? And that has come about because we still find this model that we're pursuing of capitalistic market economy and so on, and democracy. Now, we are saying in the West, we want to promote democracy. I think the aspiration is very good. But what we have seen in reality is that democracy has not delivered to the South. What it has delivered is slogans and maybe just figureheads who say, yes, we are democratic or what have you, but they are corrupt and they are not following up on things that are necessary to have a democracy, which are institutions. And a clear example of what has happened in the last 70 years is what's happening right now in Pakistan. I talked about it last week, where you have, in the name of democracy, the mafia crowd, along with the army, taking over the country and taking it down the tube. Whereas we have a man who sort of stands up and says, no, I want to be independent and do something good for the people. And he's been targeted by the local people, supported by the West, which is astonishing. Here is a clear case of what has been happening to the rest of the world when regime changes have taken place in 40 countries in the past 70 years, with America being at the back of these changes. So what we are seeing is a narrative that it's a wonderful sort of thing that we are living in the West, and therefore, I don't know why these people in the South, in the poor countries, don't do so well, and so on and so forth. You know the reasons for that. They're not poor. They've got immense riches in their territories. But they are poor because the corrupt leaders, with the support of the West, are being placed over there to carry out the biddings. And the biddings are essentially to try and keep a level of support for whatever the West wants, to do it in its own interest. So when we talk about Ukraine, Ukraine is being fought in the name of democracy and so on and so forth, but is being destroyed. Because America is not sending its troops. No one else is sending their troops, but Ukrainians are dying. And dying, why? Because USA says Russia has invaded Ukraine. And why did it invade Ukraine? Well, because USA was saying, we are going to bring NATO into Ukraine and put our missiles right there within minutes of Moscow. Now, no sane country is going to allow that to happen. USA didn't allow it when missiles were placed in Cuba. We know that. So this war is a war that has been conducted by Biden, a guy who can't think, can't put two words together. So here, the leadership has failed. Now, talking about the leadership, I would say, coming back to the subject, why China has been so successful is, as I just mentioned, I think Pam would know that, it's called the Mandarin system that they pursue. And Mandarin system is simply a meritocracy type of system. People who come to the top, they are seasoned politicians and workers, and those who have a complete awareness of what the people need, not people who have come in from a celebrity status like Trump did, or whatever other sort of forces that bring the leadership, like even Rishi Sunak. I mean, he might be good at, timesheets and so on, or Excel sheets and figure work, but he's not going to deliver because Brexit has meant that UK has shot itself in both the feet. And it's very hard for them to even stand up now. But we are not told about what the situation is. And I said earlier on, I'm feeling it in my own household because my mortgage has gone up twice from last year to this year. Twice, from 500 to 1,000. And my service charges have gone up from 2,200 to 4,000. So when we see that type of sort of response that we are getting to the measures that have been taken by USA in Ukraine and energy costs going up and so on, we can see it's leadership of the lowest quality and the lowest order. So the Mandarin system is going to be able to help us through China do something. And how they're going to do it? Well, they're going to do it by bringing in what I would call infrastructure into these poor countries. Now, why is infrastructure important? Because without infrastructure, your economy can't develop. And that is the path that China has adopted. And I will go and show a bit more detail on this. So let's get into that. Let's start off with pictures to where China is. You'd be surprised a lot of US people don't know where Ukraine is. I mean, USA is sort of a complete different world. That's why I think the decisions that have been taken by USA have gone so wrong for the rest of the world. Now, this China is just a picture. So agenda today, how did China do it? So we said briefly, it had a system of meritocracy behind it, and it was committed to a vision of uplifting the poor. Very simple sort of objective. So they had central planning, mixed economy, and then Deng Xiaoping sort of delivered on that, a bit more on that. And how are they going to actually deliver it to the rest of the world? Through infrastructure. And that infrastructure is BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. I'll show you pictures of that as we go along. And in order to support this activity globally, they have also established regional and global institutions of their own. And they're called SCO, which is the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, AIIB, which is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, RCEP, which is the Regional Economic Cooperation, and the BRICS, which is I'll talk about it a bit more, and the BRI. And this is definitely a different model that they are replicating in place of what we have is called the G7. We've got the IMF, the World Bank, and then 800 bases all over the world. So you can see it's a different sort of, mindset here as to who and how to control the world. And this last thing that I would just want to touch on is the solar panel. How did China actually lift itself up in terms of the ground realities? And that we will talk a little bit as we go along. Okay, now I said earlier on, they have uplifted the 800 million people out of poverty in 40 years. I don't think anywhere in history that has happened with that number of people to that level of being able to at least have a living. And that means that they own more than $2, because the poverty line is less than 1.90 cents or something, according to the World Bank or the UN. So they've lifted them up above that level. And they give them medical services and housing. So they're able to have food on the table, have their health taken care of, and have a shelter. So you can see this is what is required for the rest of the world as well, which we find is not there. So this is what we want to expect China to be doing soon. And here are the graphs here basically saying, let me just pull this down. Okay, sorry. They have, in fact, 40, 50 years ago, they were at the level of Haiti type of income per individual, GDP, the earning of individuals. In 50 years, they've gone up to this level over here, which gives them more than $20,000 type of scale. Don't look at these too closely at the moment, because this is just to give you an idea. This is just basically saying that in the 1950s, China's share of the world GDP had fallen from a third to below 5%. So it has now sort of moved up to quite a bit now. Now, colonial period is just a little picture to remind you there's China, there's the colonial powers of Europe standing over it, basically dividing up China for their particular types of influence. And the type of, on the picture on the right here is here, showing how China had to pay colossal sums of money to Europe to be able to try and, by way of whatever charges were imposed on China. So China became, how did China become the world's manufacturing hub? Now, this graph here is very interesting. This is the GDP in trillions. This very low here. The picture here is 1960s here at the base. I can get my cursor. And it has really shot up in the last 40, 50 years to become the second largest economy of the world. 17 trillion. UK has about 3 trillion, I think, or thereabouts. So we have an accelerated development that has really been so successfully managed that they are headed towards even higher numbers before long. Now, this guy, Xi Jinping, is a visionary of outstanding sort of caliber. He lived in a cave when his father was sort of ousted from power and so on, higher up with the hierarchy. And he got to know everything, and then he became, mayor of Peking and so on. Anyway, well-seasoned meritocracy type of background. So you can see China has gone up very much in this particular fashion to levels that we are seeing today of 17 trillion. And this is his period of thing there from 2013 to 2019. So real sort of improvement in the economy. Now, what does this improvement actually mean in real terms? Well, China imports stuff and then exports as well. And the difference is what you earn. And if you look at these figures of China, imports were 2.7 trillion, exports 3.57 trillion, which means that their income is something of the order of 857 billion in 2022. So it is, in fact, running a shop, as it were, but making lots and lots of money. And this is the type of funding that it tries to do by way of investing in various other worlds, which we see. Now, looking at the global sort of comparison here, this USA, 26, nearly 27 trillion economy, China 19 here. And by 2030, certainly is going to be over, getting past USA. And here we've got Japan here. And then we've got India at 3.7. And we've got Britain here at 3.2. Germany at 4.3. So looking at it globally, China has sort of pulled itself up so rapidly with the types of methodology that it has and is going up very fast. In fact, what had happened is when Biden came in, he was given 2 reports. This is the consolidation of think tanks reports. One was saying about what to do about China. And of course, the report said you can't do anything. And the second report was about innovation, because USA still has the edge on innovation. And in innovation, the report said, you're not spending enough money. China is spending a lot more money on R&D, and therefore it's going to sort of catch up on that sort of score as well. So the only option then that seems to be left for USA is to decry the progress that China has made, propaganda basically, and maybe have also go into war. But if that latter part is chosen, then I think, we have a questionable whether we will survive or not. Now, this is an interesting sort of graph here. If you look at the United Kingdom, which is this brown area, over the 1960s to 1920s here, the growth has not been very much, 3.8, and it has sunk below to 2.2. And if you look at the gray area, which is China, the growth from 62.3 right up to 18.3. So we have essentially a growth delivered by this BRI thinking, by promoting the infrastructure of the world that has agreed to sort of bring in that infrastructure that China is so very good at delivering. Sorry? The green is United States. It was 21.8 and it has reduced down to 15.3. So it's a decline in a way that has taken place, whereas what China has been doing is increasing its particular growth and share. America is green, yeah. Now, there's another figure here which is interesting to look at. China contributed more to the world economy, to growth, than the G7 combined. This is interesting. Here is the graph. China 38.6, and these are the growths that have been contributed by these countries. USA 18%, and the rest all in very small numbers. So these institutions that we have, the G7, the G20, and so on, they are talking shops. They're not doing anything substantive. As opposed to that, we've got something called BRICS and SEO and so on, AIB. I'll talk about it just in a little while. So again, more divergence displayed here. One can sit down and look at this in a bit more detail, but here's red is China. Share of manufacturing has gone up from practically very low numbers past United States. United States, that blue, gone up there significantly. So it has become really the manufacturing factory for the world, as it were. So, and all this has been delivering to the world through BRI. Now they see these pictures, they are very, very sort of commonly put out. This is their central authority, and they meet together and decide on policies. This is just a small picture of a link between China and UK as part of BRI type of connectivity. This is the larger picture of BRI. They've now also introduced something called the Polar Silk Route. Okay? And what we have is connectivity in such a way that this Western China, which is very poor, that's where all the Uyghurs are, and we get a lot of, news about that as to how badly they're off. But in reality, they're not that badly off. Now they have connectivity to Africa through here, and through Europe through here, and through all these. So they have adopted the old idea of Silk Route, where in those days, the transfer of technology took place and goods and so on and so forth were ferried backwards and forwards. This is the new version of that. And therefore, you have an immense amount of potential for increasing commerce between China and the countries to which that infrastructure has been delivered. And China has become, in fact, the best constructor, if you like. And they can construct things in weeks and months. So it's an immense sort of capability. Now, this Belt and Road Initiative has resulted in spending something like 4 trillion on projects. Now, all this green area of the world is where this BRI has delivered on. If there's no direct connection, it's through the sea lanes. Otherwise, it's land routes, the ports, roads, highways, what have you. Everything in terms of connectivity and transport and so on is China's real expertise now. And they deliver it to countries where they don't have too much money. So instead of money, they get paid in the resources that the poor country has. Like Congo has cobalt, and cobalt is so essential for batteries nowadays that they pay in cobalt, and they sort of sell them the infrastructure and so on. China's $1 trillion Belt and Road Infrastructure agenda. See, 76 countries included. There are more every day joining up. As you can see, it's 3/4 of the world there. And it has about 44% of the total GDP of the world and 48% of the world population, nearly half the world's population. So we're talking about big numbers and big mega projects that are underway. But we don't get to hear about it because we always hear some negatives about all these countries, especially with China. Now, again, here, this is, let me just not dwell on it too much because it just breaks it down a bit more as to which are the basic sort of areas that are being invested in the poorer countries, to give them the advantage of having the infrastructure to sort of convey their resources backwards and forwards. This is, again, the similar thing. I won't go into that. Now, basically, China has built in Africa nearly 1,000 bridges, over 10,000 kilometers of railway, 100,000 kilometers of roads, many, many dozens and dozens of schools and hospitals, and 100 ports. Now, this is a significant amount of investment, and the expertise that they have acquired is phenomenal. And we can see, if you go to any of the projects that China has undertaken, they deliver very, very quickly on it and at a cost which is controlled. Because the model that they follow is not one of giving money. You see, the IMF and World Bank, they give money to the governments. And because there's so many corrupt governments, they just pocket the money, half of it. And the other half, they try and sort of, buy arms to it or whatever to keep the arms factories going. But with China, they bring in their own expertise and they control the costs. So the government doesn't get its hands on the money. So they get built. And of course, the advantage of having that infrastructure is the government's business to run it, and that they will be able to get returns on that. Now, BRICS, you might have heard lately. BRICS is a setup that China and Russia and India got together to put together. And it starts with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are the 5 basic founding members of BRICS. Now, they got together in order to counteract the basic organizations that are there in the West. The IMF, G20, and World Bank, all these WTO and all that, which are huge, of course, but which have a lot of influence of the West on these, and not so much by these rising economies like India or China even. So they have got together and said, we will make policies on the economy that is going to be advantageous to us and not necessarily advantageous to the collective West. You know, the dollar is one of those currencies which have in fact been used by the rest of the world in order to settle their trade. It came about from the Saudi Arabia being asked to sort of denominate its oil in dollars some, 30, 40 years ago. And that meant that there was a big demand for dollars. And what that meant also was that the USA was printing the money in order to sort of, supply the demand. And because it was so extensively used all over the world, it became a weapon for USA to use. And that's when we started to hear about sanctions. So USA started to put sanctions on countries that would not do its bidding. And that's how this Russia thing has started. It's not started, we are seeing right now so many sanctions on China, so many sanctions on any country, in Iran, sanctions. So you have all these countries who are so disenchanted with the abuse that is taking place by one power, which is USA, who says, listen to us, otherwise we're going to sanction you. And that's because of the dollar. So these BRIC countries now are saying, no, we don't want to use dollar for our settlements, and we are going to sort of settle in our own currencies or with gold. With the result now that this is not just 5 countries, they've got another 60 countries who applied to join, because all of them want to be free of this dollar type of sword hanging over them, which if they don't do anything which is not to the like of USA, they get sanctioned and they have to suffer because of that. So you have essentially BRICS. The last meeting just took place last week in South Africa, and they agreed to take in more members, 6 more members, apart from the 5 that they had, and the 60 still in the waiting queue. And the 5 that came in is the Saudi Arabia and Iran, and I think a few others as well. Yeah, it's here: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, UAE, Ethiopia. And all these ones in yellow here, they're applied for membership. And of course, the ones in the red are already members. So this institution is going to be very, very powerful and will have a lot of countries following it. So you can see the share of the global share of this BRICS. The GDP is about nearly 30% of the world's GDP. Population, nearly 46%. Oil production, 43%. So they are rich in resources, and they have lots of people, and they have a similar vision. So you can see all this goes together to be able to uplift their people very, very much. This was the picture that you could see, in 1978 here. Change in poverty the poverty was rampant in China. And now this is a picture in 2023. Big change has taken place in 40 years. And this again is showing the growth of the GDP to 17 to 19 trillion. Now, before this period of things started, the change, people died. And this death was huge. This was the time of Mao. Now, just to give you an idea as to how, when the Nazis were supposed to have killed 15 million people and Stalin about 20, so under Mao, about 80 million people got killed. So that's when Deng Xiaoping came in and started to bring about the change and make the difference to China. And at that time, when he was there, this is Deng Xiaoping here, the Western leaders were very generous in inviting him over and wanting the Chinese economy and the leaders to be much more Western in their thinking. By that, what I mean is that they would become democratic. That was the aspiration. And the reasoning was that if the economy gets uplifted, then people will become more democratic and the governments would make them become more democratic. But China has not pursued that particular model. It controlled the economy, the basic things were controlled still by the state, and the private enterprise came in and did all the sort of work in order to increase commerce. So the government still had control, but the commerce was rapidly increasing. So these people are important, Carter, and then Nixon. Nixon was there very much, Reagan, and of course, Maggie Thatcher. She was also very, very sort of interested in bringing about a change in China. So Deng Xiaoping, as I said, he had an open door policy. Yeah. And one of the ways that they managed this open door policy was to have special economic zones where you could go and set up a factory at very advantageous terms and be able to sort of build up your business and become sustainable after that. So in the 1980s, I remember very well, when the Berlin Wall went down and Windows came in at that time, outsourcing became a way of life. Outsourcing was taking, if you like, virtually jobs in the West, which were very highly paid, and giving that work to the poorer countries where the labor costs were low. With the result that job markets sort of shifted over to the East. And that's one of the reasons why China came up. Because when Nixon went in and opened the China policy, they became part of the WTO. Then their business started to go into China. And those businesses were given advantageous rules to establish themselves. So we'll see in a little bit more detail how that happens. Okay, now in order to support this effort and vision, the institutions, I said, had to be there as well. Like I just mentioned, BRI as well. I saw BRI, the BRICS themselves. They got together in order to see whether they can protect themselves from this dollar sanctions and also have their own economies do transactions in their own currencies. So one vehicle was, of course, through this Belt and Road Initiative, which was a little bit like the Marshall Plan after the war. Because what USA did after the war to rebuild Europe, they put in a lot of money at the behest of the banks, the Wall Street Bank, saying we want to be able to go into Europe, we want to be able to get a share and be able to start controlling as well the finance. Therefore, it's equivalent to some extent of the Marshall Plan. That Marshall Plan wasn't given to Russia, by the way, or not to China or to any other country. AIB, this is the equivalent of the World Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, one of the things about the IMF and World Bank and all these are, before giving loans, they put conditions that you've got to become first of all, a democracy. And secondly, you need to carry out the wishes of, if put up the electricity prices, which is what's happening in Pakistan today. IMF is saying, unless you put up the electricity prices, that money which you're expecting we're not going to give. And there the bills have trebled, quadrupled. And right now there's so much unrest in the country because the unrest is brought about because of bad decision-making, corrupt leaders who are sitting here in Mayfair. And I think I told you last time I was out there protesting as well. So we have this picture, which rather sort of is obvious to most people who know what's going on, but has been twisted by the media in such a way that we believe that all this is propaganda, which is not to be believed, and that the Western policies are always very good, and not so, unfortunately. This is the Asian Development Bank. Now, RECP, this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, you might remember there was something called TPP, Trans-Pacific Pact, the time Obama was there and so on. This was to try and create trading blocks, global ones, and TPP was Pacific one. Now, for some reason, they decided that USA said, no, we don't want to be part of that. So it was already set up. And then what happened was China was kept out of it, by the way. So China said, okay, we'll come in. So they came in and USA, in place of USA. And what they have done is they've made this RECP into a huge trading bloc. And this is RCP. Even Japan and Korea are part of it because they see, and Australia and New Zealand, they see that as being very advantageous economically. But USA is not there. Because when USA comes in, it sort of carries so much weight usually that it turns it that way. And I think the country said, no, we don't want you. And that's why all these organizations that I mentioned, the BRICS and the SCO and the other one, RCEP, they don't have USA as a member. But China is a member of some international organizations, the UN, the World Trade Organization, IMF, World Bank, and so on. But even though it's the second largest economy, its voice is very small. So it doesn't have very much impact on these organizations. So this is just what I said earlier on with the dollar. Sanctions, it's become a weapon for USA to use. And it's used very indiscriminately now, totally. It's not even in the interest of Europe, or for that matter, UK. It's only in the interest of USA. With the sanction of Russia and energy pricing having doubled, trebled, so on, the competitiveness of Europe has gone down. UK has gone down. Germany has gone down. All because USA is saying that energy we will supply you from our own resources, from shale and so on that they've got. So USA has made something out of that, but at the cost of Europe and at the cost of UK. But Europe and UK are not strong enough to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this. This is the problem with the leadership of the West and Europe and of UK as well. If the USA says jump and they say how high, nothing else. And what else does USA have? 800 bases all over the world. Now the problem in Pakistan is taking place now, trying to get rid of Imran Khan. He said, no, we don't want to have a US base here. Because of that, they have brought in these corrupt leaders and the military, and they said, okay, get rid of Imran Khan. This is the story that we don't hear. What we hear is how bad Imran Khan is, how good these fellows living in Mayfair are. They're corrupt. They're worse than the mafia. They have killed people. Not only have they looted the poor people's money, they have killed people. And any case that is brought up, is sort of the witnesses are killed off. In fact, when they were in power just in the last few weeks, when the other government came in, interim government, they passed regulation in order to clear themselves, absolve themselves of all guilt and cases. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine the extent of corruption there is. And all this supported by these 800 bases all over the world. You may ask, why is that? Why do we need bases? Because the moment the local fellow leader says, no, he has the arms twisted in such a way that he can't say no to that anymore. Okay, how are we doing? Okay, we've got, I think, another 15 minutes. Now, I'm going to simply go into a little bit of detail as to what attracts companies to go into China. We said essentially that before the China sort of option came about, all the ideas, designing, manufacturing, and distribution took place in USA. This is the case of Apple. Apple then said, oh, okay, labor is so cheap here. We're going to go to China. And China said, okay, we'll give you land. We're going to help you build factory, and we won't charge you any duties on anything that you bring. With the result, what they have done, China has given all these inducements, land and import duties, construction, raw material import. They were, in fact, making it so attractive for the foreign manufacturers to come in that they couldn't say no to that deal. And that's how China started to bring in, uplift its own people. So here is a bit more detailed picture. They get all the import duties and all that, and the land investment comes in. And the taxes, even after they've been there for a little while, they're not taxed normally, which might be 33%, but only 15%. So incredible amount of advantage there is for any company to go into China and set up production. So here we are. We got people getting jobs. And what do the jobs do? It helps the people to sort of spend money, and then consumption increases. Then government doesn't have to give any subsidies to people. And then, of course, commerce starts to get underway. Here we are. This is all this picture saying virtuous cycle gets underway. So this is the difference. See the old pictures, very much in our lifetime, 1778, to what we see now, 2023, much more prosperity, and having a much more educated class of people. Middle class has increased enormously. And the innovation that is coming in is through the education that is so significantly higher now. Now, this is an example of how, when they were just taking of one industry as to what type of advantage it had. When solar cells were being manufactured and used, USA was the lead manufacturer of solar cells. But then China decided that solar cells is the future. So they started to, in fact, bring in measures that would start to make solar cells in China. The cost of solar cell was enormous. In 2008, it was quite enormous. I'll show you some figures as to how big a difference that has taken place. In fact, the cost of solar cells and that energy was significantly higher than the cost of oil energy. So, that difference we can see as well. So China started to sort of work toward making this solar cells by getting the right type of resources for the countries that it started to build infrastructures in. Because then it had the raw materials coming in. Now, here is a reduction in solar cell costs. Oh, this has got upside down here. So the Price of electricity from solar declined by nearly 90% in these 10 years. So the cost of building that was so much reduced simply because China kept on making them and not being deterred by the high cost. So that paid off enormously. Here is the graph which says, this is the green here, is the, sorry, I can't see something. This is the cost, how it has is reduced here from this angle. So the China manufacturing is this red line. It accelerated enormously, and the cost has then really gone down quite substantially here. So you can see the measure that it adopted paid real dividends. Yeah, this is again, the cost has declined from $3.59 to $40 or $11 even more. So green energy now is a lot cheaper than fuel, carbon energy. And we haven't moved over sufficiently fast to take advantage of that. Now, one of the things, as I said, China does sort of think in terms of getting the raw materials it needs. It made a deal when even solar cells were quite expensive with the Congo for cobalt, and has a big type of investment to develop the infrastructure so that they can supply cobalt to them, and China can make the solar cells. Here's cobalt here. Great reduction in cobalt prices going down since they started mining the Congo. Okay, that's all I want to say here. I'll leave some time for, if you like, I'll stop the share here. Okay, here we go. Okay, anybody who has a question out there on Zoom, you can unmute yourself. Okay, question here. Yes.
China is far more advanced in AI than even the mighty USA, which would have.
Yeah. Okay, the question here that has been asked is China further ahead in AI than USA? Well, my answer is they're about catching up about the same, because what is happening is that China has access to data. Now, what AI uses enormously is data. And China has been capturing this data one way or another, and they have access to that. Now we have in the USA, people like Elon Musk, I've talked about this, they've got enough type of foresight to be able to set up companies which have pursued AI, like OpenAI, which is the company that set up ChatGPT, was also set up by Elon Musk. And now Elon Musk has gone even further the last few days by introducing this AI into the cars, so the cars drive themselves. Now, it's not there 100%, but 98% it's there. Because it has collected data from 4 million cars that are on the road, these EVs, the electric vehicles. And that data requires enormous computing power. And he's the only one who's got deep enough pockets to be able to create that humongous computing power to train the AI to drive the car. Once it's trained, then you need very little power and code to be put in the car itself, which will drive itself. You don't have to be connected to internet, which is a mind-boggling type of historic event that has taken place last week. self-driving cars. Although the stock market doesn't reflect that as yet, it hasn't seeped through, but it is an incredible advance that has taken place. So given that, in that, USA is ahead. China has not, although China has a factory in Shanghai, they're going to build those and give them that access as well, but they will be able to keep the control of that AI simply by wanting to say, okay, we can even give it to GM and to Ford, but at a cost. We will, of course, give you our patents for free. You can develop it yourself, but they can't do the development themselves because they don't have the data. And Elon Musk and his Tesla is not going to give them the data. So data is absolutely important. Now, like ChatGPT, if you're familiar with ChatGPT, now that data is already there in terms of libraries and books and so on. You have to access the internet and you get the data. Whereas something of this other type, which is moving type of data, which is constantly changing, that is a different type of data. And therefore, in that, I think Tesla is so far ahead that nobody is even near it. So it's one of those fields that USA is still ahead of. And China, maybe on as far as imagery of capturing data from individual faces and all that, they have a lot more of that. We don't have that in the West. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Really interesting as well. I think again a little bit of utopian sort of view of China. I think in the African countries, not just China but the States, Britain, all of them, they go in there but they take all the resources really without really doing much in return.
You mean China? Well, you've got to, in fact, be very careful as to what you read, because I told you right in the beginning. So the question here is that China is not all goody-goody doing, altruistic work for the rest of the world. Oh, I agree with you. It's not doing goody-goody to everybody. What it's doing is what he calls win-win situation. You win and I win. So China wins as well and the other country wins as well. So if developments have not worked out, that's not the fault of China. It is the fault of those corrupt people who have not managed to run any of these projects profitably. And one case is the Sri Lankan sort of port that was made. Big investment, but they couldn't sort of manage to make it work well enough. So they told China, I said, look, you come and operate it. So China is now operating it on their behalf.
I'm not saying it's only that. I mean, evidently, it's only a rich thing. Nearly all of that profit goes to Britain. So I'm not saying they're the only country that does it. But, I mean, always these powers, in the end, it's sort of what's best for them.
What? I didn't quite get that last.
I think all these powers that go in to help countries, or sometimes to support wars, it's in their interest, not the country that they're helping.
Yeah. No. I don't mean to sort of suggest here that they will go and sort of set up an infrastructure in Antarctica or someplace where just a few people. Their particular sort of vision is one to be able to be really helpful to the people over there, and in return get something out themselves. So it's very clear. You see, this accusation of a debt trap, which is the normal accusation that the collective West makes against China and this BRI as well, that it is a debt trap for all the poor people of poor countries. Well, the question that I think in Romania, the Prime Minister was asked and said, what do you have to say to that? They said, look, I know we are taking a risk by bringing in this investment and asking China to build it. But unless we do that, we can't develop a business. We can't send our goods out for sale and be able to sort of have transport facilities and so on. So here they've got to balance out to see what the advantage is. So China is not going to make sure that it's all advantages to the country, but it has advantages in terms of it brings its skills and technology and partly investment as well to get it off the ground. And it's up to the poorer countries to manage it. This is the crucial thing. And now China wants, in fact, those people to succeed, because then there is more business for China to transact with that country, sell more goods to that country. So it can't be just that you take advantage of a country with no sort of prospect of that country, you know, yeah, yeah.
I mean, they don't have to be poor.
No, you see, this is why I'm saying the model that has been pursued for the last 70 years is a capitalist system and market economy and democracy. You see, with these very nice words, you can sell that particular vision, but in actual fact, what happens is the powers that be, the rich people who are controlling the dictates by dictating to the government, they want to see what advantage there is for them. And if that advantage is not accruing, then it doesn't work out very well. So that system gets spoiled and distorted. And the wrong people come in promising, yeah, we'll give you whatever you want, you put us in power. Because once they're put in power, like in Pakistan, they absolve themselves of all guilt, and then they will carry out the bidding, whatever the bidding is of the people that be, the powers that be, to give it to them, because they don't lose anything. See? It's the country that loses. Yeah, yeah.
Reservations that, like, the human rights and, I mean, they control population, don't they? Just putting on the
No, they have moved away from that because there is now a shortage of labor in China. Well, I think it was intended, benefit with a good intention, but then, of course, to bring about any big substantive changes like that, I think it does bring in certain negatives with it. So, yeah. Okay, any other question?
Is China better when it's not communist anymore? I heard that China doesn't claim to be communist anymore. Does that make any difference?
Well, China is not strictly communist because, as I said earlier on, they follow the centralized planning socialist type of vision they have. Socialist vision means people should benefit, enormously from the policies of central planners. But in order to hasten that progress of betterment of the population, they brought in the market economy to some extent, the private investment in, and that has made a substantive amount of difference.
Has human rights improved because of that? Has human rights improved? Has human rights improved because of that?
Yeah, now this thing about human rights is a big propaganda machine that gets operated in the West, because I told you these two types of reports that were given to Biden when he came in. One said you can't do anything about it. You can just basically sort of badmouth China whenever the occasion arises. Their human rights is questionable when it comes to interpretation, because Western China is very, very poor. And Western China is also Muslim with Uyghurs there. Now, if Western China, if you look at China as a country, Eastern China is much, much more developed because it has all the sort of fertile ground and the communication to the rest of the world. Western China doesn't have, because Central Asia is also bogged down by no outlets to the sea. So what China is doing right now is to try and improve the level of education to the Uyghurs, and they put them in big sort of camps to try and train them, which is picked up by the West as concentration camps, which are happening in China, which is a propaganda actually. And of course, what they're doing, of course, by creating this BRI, you've got the Western China linked up to the rest of the world, which means that the upliftment of those Western China and Uyghurs is going to happen sooner or later.
Well, you have painted a very frightening picture of a very, very frightening world. And I
Yes,
feel
it
very,
is,
very
Lily. I
powerless.
agree with you. It's very frightening because we've got the type of leadership which I think is deplorable. As somebody said, as Elon Musk says, even if you take an ordinary man off the seat and give him the reins of power, in place of Rishi Sunak or in place of Biden, they will do a better job. And I agree with
Wow.
him.
Thank you very much.
You don't
Okay.
think China's well governed, though, do you? China's not well governed, though, is it?
China is what?
China is not well governed, is it? China's got still a horrible government, isn't it?
I didn't understand. Half
Human
is what?
rights are bad in China. China still executes people. We can't praise China, can we? China is still terrible.
Yeah.
No democracy. So you can't say what
Oh, I see. Yeah. Freedom of speech. I agree with you. There's not much freedom of speech in terms of having to sort of target the government. So there are controls over there that, and of course, because they're so heavily, if you like, surveilled, if you like, they get to know very quickly if you are saying something that is against the government, because the government believes that the human rights, which in the West we say is predominantly the best thing that is there, China says before human right comes the community rights. So the community must benefit, not just the individual. And therefore, they don't subscribe to this human rights that we sort of say should be the primary thing that drives everything. No, they say no, community rights are more important. Okay, let's anyway. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.